right. Well, what'd y'all think? Did you like it? Yeah. Well, we appreciate so many of you sticking around for this post-movie discussion. I promise you that we'll have a good discussion. We'll get you out by 9. Kentucky tips off its basketball game against Georgia at 9. So I will be in front of a TV at that point. And we'll be out of here by then. So hang in there. But we got a great hour of discussion to talk about this movie and talk some about the election. And just to give some brief introductions from my immediate left, Mark Halperin, 1987 graduate of the college with Time magazine. To his left, John Heilemann, what year? 90 graduate of the Kennedy School, double Harvard alums here on stage. And Len Amato, you met earlier, the president of HBO Films. I want to begin with asking John and Mark, how did you guys, you don't work for the same media companies. I don't think you ever have worked for the same media company. How did you decide to go in together on the book?
First time we've been asked that question. No, just kidding. I'm going to defer to John on that. He's good at telling the story.
Okay.
We both were covering the 2008 campaign, and we're friends and colleagues, obviously. And in truth, we had made a plan together to go and see an event on the McCain biography tour. After Senator McCain had basically wrapped up the nomination, he was going around the country to places that were historically significant for him, places he had lived or places where important things had happened in his life. He was going to go to Annapolis.
Yeah.
And I had been on vacation. I had grabbed like 4 days off before that, and I'd spent most of that time obsessing over the fact that no one was writing a book about this campaign, because the campaign had turned out to be so much more historic and incredibly colorful than anybody expected. Even though everyone kind of thought it was going to be a great election, it was greater than anyone imagined it could be. And I had in my mind that somebody should be writing a primary colors about this thing. And I got back to Washington and met up with Mark, and we went out to see this event. And it was, we've seen some bad political events in our time, but boy, this was one of the most kind of surreal, bad political events. Like you think about the Romney event last week, where there were the empty seats. This was worse than that, because McCain was giving a speech in front of a totally empty football stadium in Annapolis. We thought there'd be 50,000 screaming midshipmen. The whole place was empty, and they had set it up so that was the backdrop. 50,000 empty seats behind McCain.
That's good advance.
Very good advance. We left that event, and I said to Mark, I said, God, somebody should be writing a primary colors on this campaign. And Mark quite sagely said to me, have you ever written a novel? And I said, no. And he said, I haven't written a novel either. I said, all right, well, that's probably out. I said, but what about a movie? Someone should make a movie. We hadn't, maybe we could write a screenplay. And Mark, again, voice of reason, said, have you ever written a screenplay? I said, no. He said, neither have I. I said, all right, so we're totally unqualified for my two ideas. And Mark at that point then said, well, maybe we could do something we actually know how to do. We could do just a nonfiction account. And over the course of the next hour or so, we talked about it in the car and ended up sitting outside literally in the shadow of the Capitol building outside C-SPAN. Where Mark was going to do a TV hit. And we sat in the car and we thought, this race has been more covered and arguably over-covered. We're going to have to be a tough sell to get people to think that you could do a book like this. But we had an idea about trying to not write about the things that a lot of political journalists write about, including us. We weren't going to write about strategy and strategists. We weren't going to write about polls and pollsters. And we weren't going to even write about history in the sense that everybody knew John McCain's history, so we weren't going to write about the Hanoi Hilton, or we weren't going to write about the Arkansas governor's mansion in the case of the Clintons, or the beaches of Waikiki in the case of Barack Obama. We thought if we try to get as far behind the curtain as we can and tell this as a really deeply human story, try to tell these very famous people how they experienced this campaign, kind of from behind their eyes, what they went through, how it changed them, how their strengths and weaknesses were brought to bear, and if we could keep the focus on the human, and really get as far back behind the curtain as you could, because people were so interested in these people, and they were so interesting. Sarah Palin was nowhere near the stage at this point. It was the spring of 2008. But we thought if we could accomplish that, maybe someone would want to read the book. And there are a lot of things that happened after that, the financial crisis, Sarah Palin, we never anticipated. But the book we wrote was the book we imagined, and whatever its strengths and weaknesses are, we executed something very close to the original concept of what we wanted to try to do.
It's a great book. I don't have to say that because you guys are here. It is a great book, and for those who haven't had a chance to read it yet, I commend you to go out and read it. It reads somewhat like a novel in the sense that it's an easy, fast pace, but very amazing, very enlightening.
Very nice. just didn't mention it makes an ideal holiday gift.
Makes an ideal holiday gift. We've got St. Patrick's Day coming up. It's a good gift
Yeah,
for St.
right.
Patrick's Day.
Arbor Day.
Arbor Day. My birthday's in April, but I already have a copy. So the title of the book, I mean, in hindsight, that makes sense. There were a lot of game-changing moments in the book. How did you decide upon that title? While you were writing it, did some editor come up with the fancy title? Did you guys come up with it?
We didn't come up with it. We struggled with it, and a friend of John's, who is an editor at Vanity Fair, Lisa O'Shaughnessy, came up with the idea, and it really fit with exactly what we were writing, even though we hadn't realized it at the time. The elements of the story of the campaign, great characters. Our joke during the writing of the book was if you've got a presidential campaign where Rudy Giuliani is the 7th most interesting candidate, you've got an interesting group of candidates to write about. Great characters, but the plot really drove it as much as the characters did. And Sarah Palin was a great game-changing moment, but so was the financial crisis. So was Barack Obama winning Iowa. So was Hillary Clinton winning New Hampshire. So was Senator McCain coming back and winning. So the number of times the game changed in that campaign, in the nomination fights and then the general election, really made it, that as much as anything else, made it distinctive and animated kind of the way we saw the narrative.
But I will say that the truth is that Elise came up with this idea after when Palin was picked. That was the trigger. It was the trigger event, and she called right after the Republican convention and said, "You should call it a game change."
Yeah.
And it fits with everything else you're thinking about. But that really crystallized.
And then throughout, not all throughout the book, but several times through the book, you use that phrase. So you're able to work that back into the narrative, which was, as you said, a series of game changes. So for HBO, how did this partnership come together? I mean, you maybe didn't need a book to do a movie about.
Well,
the
we didn't have a book at first.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Mark called Richard Plepler, co-president of HBO, and mentioned that Mark and John were thinking about doing this project. I had a meeting with Mark and John in Los Angeles. They didn't have the book. They were, I guess, beginning to work on the book. They told us a few stories to me and Richard, and we were like, hell yeah, that sounds like a movie. And now what movie it was going to be, because in terms of a game change, the idea of which film you're going to make in a book, that changes quite a bit as well as you go through the development process. But we started out early on, while Mark and John were writing the book, finding a writer with our producing partners, Playtone, and then embedding a writer with Mark and John as they were doing the work, because there was no book to look at. And we actually made a deal based on that pitch with the idea that once there was a book, we'd option the book.
Interesting. So how did you decide, once you got the business arrangement done, and how did you decide on the Palin? I mean, after all, electing the first African-American president is kind of historic, kind of a game change. Why did you focus on the Palin?
Well, you're right, and there were there were a lot of stories. There were a lot of movies actually in that book. I mean, at least 3 movies in that book, I would say. And we actually were interested in the Hillary and Obama story, and as you do, we went down that road, and we wrote a script, and Jay Roach was involved at that point, and we had the script. The script was good. The script was interesting. But it didn't really pop in a way that we felt was going to really gain momentum to get a movie done. And that's not a big deal, because we knew that there were other ways to go and other stories to tell. And Jay actually was very interested in the Palin story. And of course, as you can see in the movie, the Palin story has all the elements that make a great movie. It has a compact time frame, it has a colorful characters, it has, an underdog story, it has someone coming out of obscurity and being discovered. It has elements that are completely relatable, and so, once you start to land on something like that, and it starts working, that's really how a movie gets made. It's really looking for the best story.
Yeah. Were you guys surprised that the focus became on Palin? In hindsight, were you thinking as you were writing that might be where it would end up, or?
I don't think we thought that. We didn't really know what. We knew that in a 475-page book that there was going to have to be some choices made.
Right.
And one of the things that we as Len just said, to this day, I think there are 3 movies at least in the book.
What are the other ones? I mean,
I think Clinton, Obama, and I think Edwards is
Yeah.
a movie. I can see a potential movie. We'll be pitching that to Len in about 5 minutes.
That'll
or
probably
so.
be like a Lifetime movie,
As soon as
right?
this is
Lifetime
over.
movie?
Well, it's a lot of people in America found that a very gripping tale for sure. I think that when Jay started to talk about why he was attracted to Palin as a story, it made a huge amount of sense to Mark and I. And part of it was, the Clinton-Obama story is actually a sprawling thing. And one of the things that I didn't know, and that we didn't know when we started this, is like 2 hours is not very much time. And it's really, you think about the scale of that story, it's more like you have to do a miniseries or something. And with this thing, as Len just indicated, the compactness of it, when Jay would talk about it being a tight narrative, that you could think about, it's 2 chapters of the book, it's 60 days. It's a series of big set pieces and big moments, and then the emotional connective tissue that gets you from moment to moment. As he talked about it, I think Mark and I were like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There was a way of also, there was the compactness, and then there was also this notion that she was an every woman in a lot of ways. She was plucked from obscurity. She'd been a small town mayor. She'd been governor for just 18 months. She's in these very challenging personal circumstances. The film shows that with her, a special needs child, a pregnant daughter, a teenage daughter, a son in Iraq. She's put in all of that. Then she's put in the most intense, most high profile, most demanding kind of situation you can possibly imagine. And how basically an every woman, how she reacts to that. It's a very powerful kind of human story, and it also got at this thing that Jay and we too are really interested in, which is the mechanics of how these decisions get made, these fateful decisions in the moment, what the calculus is, what the risk and reward factors are. So much of politics is about weighing those choices, and so it illuminated universal things about politics and told you something about an American woman in the age where politics has become celebrified. Right. There were just so many themes that you could get at, and it was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. The minute Jay talked about it, we were like, yeah, we get it. Yeah.
Now, so to play that every woman, Julianne Moore, how did that come about? I mean, we watched Tina Fey, who was really a caricature of Sarah Palin, not meant to be an accurate portrayal.
Well, I think that's a big clue to it.
Yeah, how did you get to Julianne Moore?
Well, Julianne Moore, here's the thing. We knew when we were creating the story that inevitably there's going to be a scene where our actor is going to be watching Tina Fey portray Sarah Palin.
Right.
Well, once you realize you're going to have a scene or two like that, the list of who can play that role becomes very, very short. And Julianne Moore was at the top of that list because to play that, to be able to transcend that role, transcend that moment, not take you out of the picture, not a lot of people could do it. But Julianne Moore, I think,
she did a great
shows
job.
that she really could, and there's a secret weapon here.
Because the movie focused on Palin, and the book was obviously on the entire race, there were elements in the movie that weren't really, maybe they were small bits of the book or not even all. The one part of the movie that really struck me was the Nicole Wallace storyline, which I don't really recall. I didn't go back and read the book in preparation for this, I apologize, but I don't really recall her playing a large role in the book. So I think that was an addition. How did that come to be? Did Mark and John, did you help with some additional research? Was that in the book and I just kind of missed it? Or
certainly most of it, I think, is in the book. It's safe to say that
the voting piece, I think, that fact was not.
That fact was not in the book. One of the things that was really remarkable in the process is Danny Strong, who was a screenwriter on this film as well as on Recount, is an incredibly serious researcher and reporter, and he was very invested in our work, and including stuff that we learned that hadn't been published in the book. But he was also invested in finding out things for himself. He did 25 interviews plus with senior people in the campaign. And so there are some things in there that we wish we had that he was able to get. Going back, we like to think we kind of plw the ground that he was able to walk over. But
hey, you're on stage with a mic, you can say that.
Exactly. But one of the I think geniuses of the way Danny and Jay did this is we wanted to focus in the movie to some extent as today as it is in the book, which is on the principals, the candidates and their spouses. But this story really involved Steve Schmidt and Nicole Wallace, as well as the other aides around them, because a big part of the story was, as is portrayed in the film, Senator McCain was pretty far removed from most of the drama behind the scenes with Sarah Palin. and the critical moments for her. And again, she performed very well, particularly under the circumstances. The family circumstances, being given a week's notice that this was even a possibility. She did great in the announcement speech in Ohio. She did great at the convention speech. She did, better than perfectly fine in the debate. She did fine in the Charlie Gibson interview, most people thought. She had the Katie Couric interview as one bad moment. But so much of the preparation for those things, as the film shows, was the staff. And so Nicole Wallace and Steve Schmidt, as well as many others, many portrayed in the film, were a big part of the story, and you couldn't tell the story without making them a pretty big element in it.
During the movie, there was a line about the YouTube and the 24-hour news cycle and how stories are forgotten within 48 hours. And in some respects, that helped to caricature her and harm her opinion in front of some people, but it also helped to create her as well. Just in your observation about this particular campaign cycle, has that cycle, the 24-hour cycle, YouTube, the internet, gotten faster? Are we seeing stories, people being built up and torn down more quickly? Are we seeing people who otherwise wouldn't be in our consciousness but for this new way of doing things?
Yeah, well, look, the cycle gets faster every 4 years,
Yeah.
and now we've moved from we had when it was first cable news, and then we got the internet, and then we got the blogosphere, and now we have the Twitterverse, and the campaign is being conducted in tweets. And I know there are certain political strategists and operatives who work for the campaigns currently who it drives them completely mental.
Yeah, some of them are probably in the audience right now.
Maybe some of them are in the audience right now. And it's accelerated rapidly.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of reasons why we saw over the course of 2011 and into 2012 the kind of extraordinary phenomenon of these Republican candidates, some of them eminently qualified, some of them less qualified by traditional metrics, rise up and fall back to earth in quick succession. The flavor of the month scenario that we saw,
Right.
I think that is partly a byproduct of this whole sped up news cycle. And the rise and fall now happens not over the span of 3 months or 4 months. It can happen with the span of 2 or 3 weeks, as the news cycle now becomes almost instantaneous with the way that the modern communications technology is affecting things. I think it's a byproduct of that, and there are other reasons why that's happened in the Republican race for sure, but it's part of it. That's part of the story, and I just don't know how it can get faster, but I bet in 2016 it's going to be
Probably
even faster.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this Palin phenomenon a little bit as well. She's still an important figure in politics and in the Republican Party. We've seen reaction from her fans who haven't even seen this movie. A visceral negative reaction, and we probably have seen a visceral positive reaction from people who don't like Sarah Palin, and she gets a rise out of people. She's still an amazing. What impact are you seeing, maybe from the production side? It looks like there's been some publicity about this. Is probably a good thing, right?
Well, I think that anything that encourages people to watch the film and buy more books is a good thing.
Yeah.
And because we're proud of the movie and we believe in the film, and of course we expected that people would have opinions one way or the other on this. We don't go into it trying to promote a particular political agenda. Like I said, we're looking for the best story and the story that's going to engage the audience. Most of the people have been critical about it, haven't seen the film. And our opinion on that is simply wait till you see the film, and if you want to be critical then, let it rip. It's okay,
All right, well, let's bring the audience into this discussion. And while we've got microphones, there's 2 on the loge, 2 on the floor here. As with all of our events, we want to ask you to follow our simple rules here in the John F. Kennedy Forum, John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. One is to state your name and your affiliation to Harvard if you have one. Make your question brief, and make sure it ends in a question mark. And we'll go to this gentleman right here.
My name is Ben Bolger, and I'm an alumnus of the GSD. And I always think it's interesting to kind of reflect on history. And I was mindful of George McGovern's campaign and his affiliation with Senator Eagleton, which probably turned out not to be the strongest boost to his campaign. When you were doing the background research for Game Change, did anyone in McCain's campaign reflect on how McGovern handled the crisis with Senator Eagleton? And did that inform at all their situation? Did they learn from mistakes of the past?
Remember the answer to that question?
I don't know that I can't testify that it now seems like a really long time ago, and we did a lot of interviews. I don't have a memory of ever hearing anybody reflect on the Eagleton phenomenon. I'm trying to think of what kinds of things people did reflect on. I mean, I think you heard, there was more, I think the Quayle precedent occasionally came up at moments where people look back on some of the moments when he had a kind of a deer in the headlights look on some of her worst moments. I remember a couple people mentioning that, but I don't know that there was a lot of that kind of. I mean, there was a lot of reflection on the choices they made and on especially on the thing Mark mentioned a little while ago, which, as much as anything, I mean, we often say, people say Sarah Palin was unprepared to be for the vice presidency or unprepared to be on the ticket. That word means two different things to us, and the obvious one is, well, she didn't know enough stuff, and et cetera. And that you can take that position. The one that really hit home for us was that she was unprepared in the sense that she was not adequately prepared by the campaign. One of the consequences of what you saw in the movie, where McCain wrapped up the nomination in March, and he spent from March to August vetting candidates who he would never choose. And he ended up 5 days before having to make this choice in a situation where anybody he picked that he vetted, he was convinced he would lose with, and so he's now casting about for somebody else at the very last minute, and that put them in a terrible position and put her in a terrible position. Because the truth is, if they had chosen her 3 months in June, if they had chosen her on the schedule internally that the Obama campaign had worked with Biden, and they had been able to prepare adequately to defend her, and they'd been able to prepare her more adequately for the pressure she would face, and they were able to actually vet her, and most of the problems that she faced in terms of skeptical questions, there were actually answers to. And even if they weren't great answers, at least they could have been prepared to give them. Part of the problem, what you saw there at the convention, was that these questions were being asked of them. They didn't know the answers. And that did not serve her purpose. It did not serve her ends. It did not serve her. It did not serve her fairly, and did not put her in the best position to succeed. And I think that when we did the research, a lot of the things that people in the campaign reflected on most self-critically was having let themselves get to that point where they ended up picking someone who they didn't know well enough and who was, because of things they had done, not adequately prepared and ready to face what they would have to face when they went forward.
Next question.
Great. Hi, my name is Jacob Merlo. I am asking this question on behalf of the Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics, and thank you so much for being here. I much enjoyed the movie. I'm wondering how you might respond to the claim or the argument that this movie is biased against Sarah Palin, and that it wasn't fair to portray her as unintelligent or superficial. Could you perhaps allude to some of the evidence that you were able to gather from the interviews, obviously not identifying sources, but kind of just explaining that and how you would respond to somebody that criticizes the movie as not being fair to her and her in reality? So thank you.
There's a lot of ways to answer that. Let me try three that I think are most relevant. Number one, there was not a single discussion that we were involved in the making of this film, and we were involved in plenty, where bias or an agenda came up at all. Number two, the people who are saying it, anyone who's saying it's biased, and again, most people haven't seen it, I think it'll be incumbent upon anyone who thinks that to say specifically what they mean, what they think is inaccurate or has some agenda behind it. I don't think they'll be able to come up with that, because the third thing is, as with the book, this is based on not an opinion or analysis, but reported fact. We did a lot of interviews with people who were involved in this directly, and we were very careful. I think, John agrees, that the book and the film are as balanced and accurate and fair portrayals of Sarah Palin during those 60 days as anything that's been done. There's, I think, many favorable things to be said about the job she did and about the difficult challenges she faced and how she met them, and they are portrayed both in the book and in the movie. So there's a lot of, as Trey suggested, there's a lot about Sarah Palin and the reaction to her that is polarizing, and where one side or the other marshals its own set of selected facts or opinion to try to have a biased agenda. In both intent and execution, neither the book nor the movie has that, and I'd urge everybody who has a feeling that it might be biased to take a look at it. And I'd welcome their specifics, and we'd look at them, but I don't think anybody's going to be able to do that with any credibility, because the things in there that are more favorable and the things in there that are less favorable are based on reported fact with the people who were present for these events.
Great, thanks.
Thanks very much. My name is Joel. I'm a grad student here. I bought the book the second it came out in the UK and read it cover to cover, and it was also a phenomenal film. But one of the most standout points for me in the book was when Joe Lieberman was invited to pray with Sarah Palin before a debate. And I'm just interested, why didn't it make it into the film? For me, it was such a standout moment. And did it end up on the cutting room floor? Did it even not make it there?
It did. We shot it.
You shot it and cut it?
We shot it, and it ended up on the cutting room floor. I mean, it's just, it's one of those things about making a movie, you know. It was a great scene, and Austin Pendleton was fantastic. The actor played Joe Lieberman. It was a great moment, but, you know, you're constantly honing in the editing process, moving the story forward. And you make one decision here, and it affects another decision here, and that's what happened.
Kind of a behind-the-scenes thing from the set. When they cut the scene, I stormed off.
I look forward to the director's cut.
And you know, I made that point earlier about how amazing 2 hours is. It turns out, you know, there's a lot of stuff that falls into this category. There's stuff that was shot that then didn't make it in, not because it wasn't great, but just because there wasn't, you know, choices have to get made, and stuff from the book that didn't get there, or stuff from Danny's original versions of the early drafts of the screenplay. You remember Danny's original, the version that he ended up with was, even though it was only 2 chapters of the book, it was still the screenplay was still too long, and so Danny was cutting pages every time certain anecdotes would go away from the book. Mark and I would cringe, and it was like, God, I really wish that could be in there. But it turns out, man, 2 hours is like it's a heartbeat.
It's a brutal process, development, and you know, sometimes you start and it doesn't work, and you abandon it, and sometimes you have to, you know, lose your babies, you know, along the way, and that's what happens. It happens in the script phase. It happens in the editing phase,
and even in the book phase.
Imagine if they put in the Lieberman-Palin prayer scene, but had cut the Lieberman, Graham, McCain watching John Edwards' I Feel So Pretty. Imagine how you'd feel then.
Yeah, right. Awful. Well, I'm glad they left the St. Paul reporters. That was a really key scene. The actors were brilliant in that.
They were pretty good at it.
They were pretty good.
Yeah, somehow we had room for that.
Compelling, yes. You're on, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Steve Randazzo, and I'm a master's student at the Kennedy School. And I'm just wondering, having spoken to people within the campaign after the fact, do you get a sense of who people within the campaign wish they would have picked? And if not, who do you think they should have picked? And granted, I know then we wouldn't be watching the same movie, but just a hypothetical.
Well, you know, there are still people there were strong advocates in McCain's camp for picking Lieberman. And to this day, I think there are people who would still say that they would have been better off picking Lieberman. And I think some of that owes to a pessimism about their likelihood of winning under any circumstances. You know, the position that Mark Salter makes in the movie, and in fact, in reality, in the case he made for Tim Pawlenty, is one that I think that Mark Salter probably to this day believes still that they should have picked Tim Pawlenty. That his warning to McCain about the possible damage to his reputation is one that was really deeply felt on Mark Salter's part. And I think that, you know, for people there are people who feel that no one, I think, believes Sarah Palin lost the election for John McCain. No one around McCain believes that. And in fact, there's a good case for the fact that she actually did better for him. She actually helped him, especially by driving enthusiasm on the Republican base. But among those who still feel as though McCain has suffered some damage to his reputation, and there are those around him who feel that, they would probably tell you that that would have been better for him in the long run if he was destined to lose anyway. To have lost with someone that wouldn't have cast any kind of negative, unflattering aspersion on his reputation going forward. And some of those people would say Lieberman, some would say Pawlenty. But I do think that with the benefit of hindsight, most of them think that it was an unwinnable election for him, and that's the filter through which they look at it all at this point.
Mark, you want to add anything to that?
If you could get him through the convention and the campaign lawyer says he could spend his own money as a vice presidential candidate, I would have picked Michael Bloomberg in a $3 billion check. It's probably the best because they needed a lot of money.
Yeah, they did need a lot of money. Thanks, Steve. Yes.
Hi. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. I watch you guys on MSNBC a lot, so it's nice to see you in Harbor. My name is Josh Dixon. I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School, and religion came up a little bit in this movie, and it came up a bit in the book. And I'd love to hear you guys talk a little bit about how you see religion playing a role in the current election.
Before you do that, one thing I noticed in the audience was in several of the religious scenes, there was some snickering in the audience.
People at Harvard snickering at religion?
Yeah. But it struck me as one of the more,
Okay.
this is a great question, because it is one of the more polarizing aspects of Sarah Palin, is her faith and how that plays out in politics.
Well, in this election, the Republican Party almost certainly now is going to nominate either a Catholic or a Mormon. Obviously, they've never done. And I continue to be optimistic about America in every way, and this one, in this case, my optimism is being rewarded because there's not been all that much discussion about it. It's clear that it's still a problem for some people, but I think it's not. Just as race did not decide the 2008 election, even though it may well have been and certainly was an issue for some people, I don't think religion's going to decide this election. I think that's fantastic. One of the things that I think is brilliant about the film is I heard a little snickering at some of those parts too. You show that movies in certain parts of Kentucky, you wouldn't hear snickering at all, and it's played totally straight. It's not played.
Right.
It's totally eye of the
I
beholder.
didn't think the movie was causing the audience to snicker.
Yeah, no, I know you didn't. So I think that there's still a pretty big disconnect in America between red and blue in some ways, and the line, this isn't about religion, but I think it's the same idea. When the guy says the thing about Sarah Palin and guns, and he believes her, again, that line probably played different in Kentucky than here. And again, someone who's supportive of Sarah Palin, I think, would look at that and say, yeah, that's one of the real attractive things for a lot of conservatives about her. So religion is still a divide, both in terms of people who are religious or not religious, as well as between religions and some people's attitudes towards them. But I think over time that's less of an issue, and I think it's less of an issue, as I said, in this race than it would have been 4 years ago, in part because Governor Romney's run before, and I think that's fantastic for the country and fantastic for the candidates, because again, there's been a time in the past where a Mormon or a Catholic would not have had a very good chance to become the Republican nominee simply by virtue of their faith.
And I'll only add the one thing. There are many things to say about this, but I found there was something really extraordinarily heartening to my mind about Rick Santorum making the comment that he made about John Kennedy's defense of separation of church and state, and being rewarded for that by losing the Catholic vote in Michigan. I think that speaks well. It's not I think people of all political persuasions and all faiths should be able to unite behind what President Kennedy said, and I think that it's a good thing to see that kind of the way that Senator Santorum, not just in substance but in tone, rejected what Kennedy said. To see him punished for that in some way, I think is a healthy thing in the Republican Party and in the country generally.
Thank you.
We've got our last question from the audience right here.
Okay, thank you very much for being here and for your very fascinating movie. My name's Simon Rowell. I'm a second-year grad student at the Kennedy School. Since we're at the Institute of Politics, I was wondering what your perspectives were from writing the book and making the movie of what do you think the most important lesson is that we can take away for the American political system in general?
That's a good last question. Hard last question.
Yeah.
Good,
That's not a true-false question.
No.
You promised us only true-false questions, Trey.
I'm a politician. I lied.
I think there are many, many. If you ask me to choose just one, I'd say that campaigns are chaotic, and you'll never have a campaign with a system that works like clockwork, no matter how organized the campaign is, and therefore you must always have the human element in mind. You have to recognize you're dealing with human beings in the form of staff and in the form, in this case, of a candidate, and that is going to add an unpredictability to it that, as much as possible, the chaos of the campaign has to account for.
I think I'll be a little bit more microcosmic, although I still think that this should be a perennial lesson. I think that whatever you think about Governor Palin, she had strengths, she had weaknesses, et cetera. The biggest problem that she posed, and again, it's a problem that Mark Salter identified, was that she was not immediately embraced by Americans as qualified for the job. It was not immediately apparent. And as a political lesson, and I know Mark and I say this all the time, you know, when a presidential nominee has to make this choice, you know, there are all these people who say, well, can they carry this certain state? Can they carry the female vote? Can they carry this? Can they carry that? I think voters look at that decision as only one thing, as a basis of what does this tell me about this nominee's judgment? This is a huge decision that has huge consequences. It should be taken seriously and be responsibly made. And your political imperative is the same as your substantive imperative. They are identical. And that is to pick someone who is ready to serve from day one, if something should happen to you as the president-elect, and someone who is perceived that way. That is the main question voters ask. And for the McCain campaign and for Sarah Palin, the biggest problem was that was not immediately apparent. In the case of Joe Biden, immediately apparent. No one doubted that he was ready to be president. In the case of Dick Cheney, no one ever doubted that he was ready to be president. It was the question was dispensed with the moment the name was announced. And I think that every presidential nominee going forward, you know, should look at this as a case study in why it's so important to choose someone who dispenses with that question, answers that question in the affirmative right off the bat.
What lesson do you think you want your viewers to take from?
I mean, you know, every viewer should decide for themselves, but I just think, generally speaking, and this is true for, you know, Democrats or Republicans, the pressure to win, it's a contest, and the pressure to win causes decisions to be made, and those decisions are significant, and, you know, they have great implications for our political process, and I think that crosses both sides of the aisle, and that's something we need to be thinking about.
Are we going to see a sequel? Are you guys working on a book on the 2012 cycle yet? Have you made that decision?
It's already underway, sir.
Underway, sir. And have you, you started pitching the movie idea?
We're still trying to get him to make the other two movies
Oh,
that are in the first book.
Yeah.
We'll work on that, then we'll start thinking about the next book.
Well, thanks to HBO Films for giving us this extraordinary sneak peek at this film, and thanks to our three panelists for talking about it.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. You're welcome. Generous. Thank you.